Have you ever thought about becoming a public servant, a politician, a political staffer, like I used to be, a journalist, or just someone who can have an impact on Australia's public policy, maybe change the way that we live in Australia today? And I teach the course for you. It's Australian Political Institutions, POLS2114. It's a second-year course, but we take basically anyone who's interested in politics or who wants to learn more about Australia's political system. With my co-convener and very good friend, Professor Zoe Robinson, we take you all the way back to 1901. We start by looking at the Constitution, the framework for everything that happens in Australia today, from the legislature, the executive, to the High Court. We look at our founding fathers, who aren't necessarily the most interesting people you'll ever meet, but they shaped Australia in 1901, and it has enormous impacts on us today in 2020. We next look at the way that the legislature comes together, the way that we elect our representatives. If you're interested in elections and votings, this is the course for you as well. Why do we have compulsory voting? Why do we have preferential voting? Why do we have perhaps the world's most complicated electoral system? And what impact does that have on how we include voters in the system, and also the kinds of representatives that we end up electing? What about our very solidified two-party system and the way that the two major parties work together to keep out competitors, even someone like the Greens? We look at the way that the cabinet is chosen and the kinds of people who we see in our ministry today and in future years as well. Why do we have such a white middle-class male bias in our executive system? We also look at, and here's where Professor Robinson steps in, the relationship between the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. Who is on our High Court? Why don't we know much about them? Why do we assume that they're not very political, even as we look somewhere like the US? And we just basically assume that their Supreme Court is highly political. On the other hand, we don't think that we have the same kind of ideological incentives in Australia. We try to break that apart for you, and hopefully we leave you a little bit more cynical, a little bit more skeptical, but overall a lot smarter about our political system. I have a kind of goal with this course that we want anyone coming out to be smarter than the journalists who are writing the news that they read in the paper. So we take a very theoretical framework. We look at the incentives, the motivations, and the constraints that dictate the kinds of behavior that we see from our politicians and our political leaders. And hopefully by knowing that, you can read between the lines of the news and know why we have this rotating door of prime ministers, why we have a high court about whom we know very little, why we have a very strong two-party system, why we have branch stacking in either party, why, for instance, the political parties aren't that interested in having a mass membership. All of these things that may have baffled you about Australian politics, we can lift the lid on. If you want to know anything more about this course, if you want the kinds of skills that will make you the best public servant, the best political staffer, the best politician that you possibly can be, then look us up on the contact details that follow. Track me down on Twitter or online, and you can contact me with any questions that you might have, and we hope to see you in class soon.